Okay, members, welcome to today's meeting of the ESPO Management Committee. This meeting is being broadcast live on YouTube and will also be available for viewing after. We have received apologies from Councillor Butlin, Councillor Peck and Councillor Jamieson, as well as Councillor Fitzgerald, who will be supported by Councillor Sainsbury. Due to the apologies from both new Norfolk members, the authority who is the authority due to hold chairmanship for this year, members are recommended to appoint Councillor Rawlins as chairman for the duration of this meeting. Can I get agreement?
Thank you for that introduction, and thank you members for letting me chair the meeting today in the absence of colleagues. Just going to the agenda, I do apologise. Our first item on the agenda, obviously we've covered, is the appointment of the chairman, and obviously this will just be for this meeting. But I would just like to go on to item 2, which is the chairman's announcements. And sorry, Councillor can't be with us today, but as is the convention, I would like to take this opportunity on behalf of the Management Committee and ESPO senior officers to reflect on just some of the achievements of Councillor Butlin in his capacity as chairperson of ESPO Management Committee for 2021. He has, as we all know, overseen the introduction of a new flexible working environment for ESPO staff, making best use of space and technology as well. And also achieved a trading surplus of £5.6 million despite the difficult macroeconomic circumstances we faced this year, meaning a 1-year bounce back of £1 million surplus from 2021. ESPO Trading Limited has returned a growing profit after only a third full year of trading. ESPO Procurement Services created a record rebate of £9 million. Also, Councillor Butlin has overseen the approval of a 26,000 square foot warehousing extension to Grove Park, including mobilisation of contractors and project board to deliver for the peak season of 2024. Progression of a business development agenda, including My School Fund partnership with Sainsbury's, launch of Smarter Solutions branding using ESPO frameworks for a wider customer group, the growth into Scotland via Scotland Excel framework place. And last but not least, the pilot of electric delivery vehicles in the ESPO fleet. So thank you once again to Councillor Butlin for what is during the year. So if I could then move on to item 3, which is the election of the Vice Chairman. Now, as Kat has explained in her introduction, the nominated Vice Chairman, Mrs. Maggie Wright, that can't be with us today, but I would wish to know if we're all happy to move the recommendation that she is elected Vice Chair this year. So could I have a proposer and a seconder? Thank you. All those in favour? Carried, thank you. And then we'll move on to item 4, which is the minutes of the meeting held on the 16th of March 2022. Could I have those agreed, members, please? Who is here? That's the key, isn't it? Yeah, that's okay. So I think I was here, so that's all okay. Is it? Yeah. Okay. So if we can then move on to item 5, to advise of any urgent items, and I don't think I'm not aware we have any of those. Thank you. Item 6 is the declaration of interest in respect of items on this agenda. Do you members have any declarations? No, thank you. We're moving on to item 7. Items referred to the Management Committee from the Finance and Audit Subcommittee, and there were no items referred, and the issues considered by the subcommittee will be covered in items 10 and 14, which obviously appear elsewhere on the agenda. So moving on, we have item 8, which is the external audit of the 2021 financial statements. And we have Avatar Sahal of Grant Thornton, who's the audit director, and Andy S. Reid, senior manager at Grant Thornton, are in attendance, and Dave Goodacre, our financial controller, will introduce this item. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everybody. So this agenda item is feedback on the external audit from 2020-21. There's a covering paper and a variety of appendices included within the pack, but ultimately this is a key part of our governance and our annual governance cycle. Now, you'll be familiar that ESPO isn't required to have an audit by law like a lot of other companies or public sector, but it's part of our constitution and it's part of demonstrating good governance to the committee and getting confidence in and assurance over our numbers and our sort of financial procedures. We've got Grant Thornton obviously on the call now, and the view is that they're able to present directly back to the committee so you can get assurances over the governance and any issues that they may or may not have found. So I think at that point of view, I shall pass over to Andy, and is Avatar on the call as well, Andy?
Morning. No, unfortunately, Avatar's having to give his apologies. He's been a last-minute issue's come up, so I'll be covering this item if that's okay.
Can I just ask you just hand on a sec while we just turn your volume up in the meeting room?
Hello, testing? Hello, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, that's better.
Is that better? Excellent. Yeah, sorry. As I said, unfortunately, Avatar's having to give his apologies for today. He had planned to attend to present our items, but some issues come up, which has meant he's not able to do so. But I will be presenting our findings on behalf of Grant Thornton, if that's okay. As David has said, there's a number of papers that are on the agenda today. I think probably the key one from our point of view that I'd like to talk you through is the Audit Findings report, which is the formal document that we issue that summarises the results of our audit. So if committee members are happy for me to talk through that, I think there are probably just 2 or 3 key points I want to draw out on this. So the first one on page 5 of our report refers to the status of the audit. Essentially, we're saying that the work is complete on the audit. There are no issues that will prevent us signing off. There's no material errors or amendments identified within the accounts. The one issue, though, that we do need to flag is that last year the accounts were qualified on a limitation of scope basis because we weren't able to attend the Stocktake as at March 20 due to COVID lockdown. Unfortunately, that's had a knock-on effect for the 2021 financial year as well, because essentially it means that because we weren't able to attend the Stocktake at the start of the financial year, we're not able to get assurance on the opening stock inventory figures. So there is the same technical qualification on the 2021 financial statements because of that inability to attend the Stocktake at the start of the financial year. We were able to attend the Stocktake on the 31st of March 21, so going forward this will no longer be an issue. But the opinion for 2021 will have a very similar limitation of scope qualification within it that relates to the inability to attend that Stocktake. In terms of other key points that we flag, I think probably the key ones really to bring to members' attention are the misstatements that we identify and that we report in here. So on page 11 of our pack, there is an adjusted misstatement which is 103,000, and this was to do with the classification of interest costs on the pension liability, I believe it was. That has been amended in the account, so the final version of the accounts that you see today, that amendment has been reflected. We reported for completeness. It's clearly not a material figure at 103,000. The materiality that we work to is set out on page 6 of our report, and it's 1.6 million effectively. So that is well below our materiality thresholds. On page 12, we also refer to one unadjusted misstatement, which is relates to the application of depreciation on revalued buildings. The approach that the committee has always taken on its buildings is to have them revalued annually, and because of that hasn't applied depreciation. I think technically there should still be depreciation applied on buildings, even though they're subject to valuation. And that hasn't been done. So we flagged that as an unadjusted misstatement. we've calculated that depreciation that would have been applied for this year is 155,000. Because buildings are revalued at year and there's no actual net impact on the building value, the only difference is effectively how the charge between the split of the charge between revaluation movements and depreciation gets reflected in the income and expenditure account. So this would be a slight change to the way that those figures are presented. As I say, the impact would be 155,000, which was as depreciation rather than as a revaluation movement. That hasn't been adjusted in the accounts, but again, we're happy that it's not a material adjustment. It wouldn't have a material impact on the overall position as it's presented. And so from our point of view, we're happy to accept that as an unadjusted item. We would just ask committee members to confirm that they're also happy that adjustment hasn't been made, and the letter of representation, which again is one of the items before you, will make reference to that unadjusted misstatement not amended. Those really were the only points I wanted to pull out. So in terms of the audit itself, as you can probably tell by the small number of points that we've flagged, there were very few issues coming out of the audit. There's no significant control issues or any of the concerns that we've identified. The report itself goes through the various significant risk areas that we looked at, which includes the valuation of the pension liability, which is clearly a material figure for the committee, but there's no issues or concerns or comments that we've pulled out on any of those risk areas. So I'm happy to take any questions that members may have, but that was all I was going to say at this point.
Thank you, Andy, for your explanations. They're very clear, and we'll have some questions from the members accordingly. Thank you. Councillor, thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Councillor James Polar from Leicestershire County Council, and thank you very much for the presentation. It was interesting to hear. In terms of the qualified assurance that's been put on, I understand that's because the initial one was in April 2020, so just a month after lockdown started. Would it be fair to say that every organisation in our, like ourselves, is going to have the same issue, because obviously it was a national lockdown, so no one was going to be able to go in and inspect stock?
Yeah, certainly it was a very widespread issue that any organisation that had material stock balances and that were unable to carry out, or auditors were unable to attend stock takes at March 20, would have had similar qualifications last year and will have similar qualifications this year. It will depend on what level of stock is held. So actually in local authorities, for example, it's quite rare that local authorities have material levels of stock. So there wouldn't have been too many local authorities qualified on this basis, but certainly in the commercial sector, it would have been quite a widespread qualification. In other parts of the public sector, such as NHS trusts, again, it was quite a widespread qualification. So yes, it was a common issue. And I think as we reported last year, it was nationally recognised. I think also the Financial Reporting Council put out some guidance on this. So it was a very common position, and it was clearly to do with the lockdown arrangements that were in place at the time.
Andy, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much, Andy, for your presentation. Councillor Andy Coles here from Peterborough. My interest really is on the relationship that you have with the financial team within ESPO, and about your level of comfort about the information that you've received over the audit and the number of queries that you might have had that needed correction, and just an idea really about the relationship between auditor and the finance team, please.
Yeah, so I think, as I've said, that the level of adjustments to the draft financial statements were very limited. There was only one adjustment that's effectively made that impacted on the financial figures, which I think from our point of view suggests that the quality of the draft accounts prepared was good. And then the ongoing relationship we've had with the finance team, so both in terms of the relationship with Dave and other members of the finance team, I think that we've had a good level of cooperation. We've had good access to information, working papers. We've had prompt responses to queries where we've raised them. So I think we were happy with the level of cooperation and the responses that we were getting. Also, the quality of the initial draft accounts and the working papers we were getting were of a good standard. So yeah, no issues or concerns that we'd want to raise around any of that.
I'm grateful. Thank you very much.
just want to sort of bring up a couple of items, Andy. Initially, obviously, you mentioned the depreciation charge. Clearly, that's a non-cash cost, so it's an accounting convention, essentially, isn't it? So at the end of the day, I presume we'll be making that adjustment in the current year's accounts. And in terms of the audit timescale, can we look forward to a more prompt receipt of the figures for the 22 event?
Yeah, I mean, on the depreciation point, just to flag, so I think that will be an accounting policy decision that the committee needs to make around whether that is something that you want to do going forward. In terms of future audit arrangements, this is actually the last year that Grant Thornton will be involved in the audit process for the committee. So 2021 is the last year that we're delivering. I do understand from discussions with David that new auditors have been appointed, and so arrangements are in hand for taking that forward. But in terms of the timescales on that, it's unfortunately not an area that I can really comment on.
I can take that question though, Councillor. Sorry, Chair. So yes, the committee will be familiar from meetings sort of towards the end of last year. So I think in November we shared that we were going through a procurement exercise to try and resource some auditors who would have capacity, and that was done quite openly with Grant Thornton as well. We had appointed new auditors earlier this year, and they have commenced work and are basically working currently on the latest audit, and we're hoping to be able to share results to the committee in the September management committee. So back on track with a sort of much more timely presentation of results.
Thank you, Andy. Thank you, Dave. Because obviously in the private sector you have a deadline to get them out. You've got your 9 months for the Companies House, and that's it.
Yes, you're absolutely right. Yes, ESPO is not subject to that particular time limit, but you're absolutely right. From a good governance perspective, we want to get the results finalised and shared on a really timely basis.
Great, thank you both. Thank you. And so, do I have those?
Yes. So the recommendation is so the committee is asked to approve the external audit of the financial statements.
Okay, thank you. So we're all happy to do that. Thank you. Thank you, David. Thank you, Andy.
Thank you.
If we can move on to item 9, which is the financial statements themselves on the AGS, the annual governance statement, and move over to Dave again, if that's okay.
Sure. Thank you very much. So related item, obviously, but this particular element covers the actual document for the financial statements and our annual governance statement. In terms of the financial statements, obviously we've just gone through the audit opinion, but the key points to draw out are the financial statements are showing a net profit for 2021, which is £4 million. It's in line with last year. There's a slight difference to the surplus that we report through our management accounts on a sort of quarterly basis, and that's for certain year-end adjustments that we go through, such as dealing with the year-end pension accounting and certain other year-end adjustments like the property revaluation. The members will recall that a dividend of 3.3 million was paid in December last year in respect of this year. And in terms of other areas, so the financial position shown by the statements is very strong. So we're showing net assets of just under £18 million. And that's an area that we retain that to obviously pay the dividend out, but it also allows us to have the reserves to fund the new warehouse expansion, and also supports our working capital with business. Andy drew out some of the areas of judgment in the accounts. So the principal areas being the pension, where we're showing a deficit, very similar to the position I suspect you'll be seeing within your own authorities and their own accounts. But that's all funded through our month-to-month payroll contributions, and is going to be settled over, over an extended period of time. So it's not something that we have to pay out, for example. There's a valuation of the land and buildings at our Grove Park site, which we undertake every year, and we get surveyors in to give an opinion on the valuation, and that's supported by market evidence that they collate. And then the other assumption going through is perhaps relatively topical. So it's around what we call the going concern assumption. And this is an assumption that the ESPO business is going to be trading for the foreseeable future. And the key time period that's traditionally set is at least 12 months from the date of signing the accounts. I suppose the alternative is we're not a going concern, and then the presentation of the accounts becomes very different. So that's one of the key assumptions that we've made. The committee will have seen from the papers that trading through the last year and through the start of this year has been very strong. And so that we feel very confident in that assumption, but it is no less a key assumption that's been made that the committee is comfortable been made. In terms of the annual governance statement, so this is very traditional within local authorities. So again, some of you will be very used to this. It's not a document that ESPO needs to do, unlike local authorities, but we do choose to do it because it helps give assurance to the committee about the quality of the governance arrangements. And with Andy's piece coming through from Grant Thornton, the idea is it links nicely to the financial statements in that you have assurance from the external auditors coming through, and then through the annual governance statement, you've got assurance coming through from both internal audit and the senior management team within ESPO. And across those three pieces, that should give the committee some assurance over the quality of governance arrangements within the business. So the ultimate recommendation for the committee is we're asking for the financial statements to be approved and the annual governance statement. And the financial statements are something that we do publish on our website to make available to stakeholders, to the public and to suppliers as well. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Dave. Have any members' questions on the financial statements? Obviously, these are things we've sort of reasonably familiar with, I think, from previous meetings. Just on one point, Dave, regarding obviously the importance of reserves and having adequate working capital to support the organisation. Obviously, we referred to the going concern concept, which is generally taken as read unless you've got some really unfortunate post-balance sheet events that might damage that, but that would be very unusual. But in terms of reserves, obviously looking at the circumstances of the world economy and everything now, are we happy that we're going to keep a good focus on those going forward? I know it's not particularly related to the paper, but it's a general question.
Yes, really good question, and given everything that's going on in the economy, something that's really important. Members might note that in the later paper, agenda item 14, which is in the closed session, there is actually further detail given on our reserves and the plan a forecast for the next 5 years. But absolutely, it's something we're really mindful of, both from the volatility that could potentially arise through trading, but also just the impact of inflation coming through and the impact on our working capital, need to maintain cash positions. So the approach that the committee have taken over a number of years to retain some of the surplus within ESPO each year has proved really effective. That's given us the resilience historically, and looking ahead, we expect that to give us a level of resilience against potential risk factors that might appear.
That, Dave, one final point regarding the deficit on the pension fund. I think, as we all know, that's a very long-term situation. You're looking at over the next 20 years, and one hopes that the investments will sometimes they go down, but can obviously stage of recovery as well. And obviously, that is something we've just got to keep a long-term view of. A lot of that is controlled by central government legislation in terms of pension contributions required from the public sector, which, because I know we're part of the Leicester Fund. Thank you.
Yes, you're absolutely right. So we're just part of a much broader scheme, so the local government pension scheme, and we follow the treatment that's applied nationally off the back of that. In terms of contributions, we're making contributions through the regular payroll, both for the current employees, but also an element relating to the deficit, much the same as the other authorities will be. So we're in exactly the same position, but it's all funded, it's all factored into our medium-term financial plan, and just it's almost part of business as usual, is just covering these pension costs.
Dave, thank you very much. So we have the recommendations for the financial statements. If members haven't got any further questions, are we happy with those, to approve those? Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay. If we can now move on to item 10, which is the Internal Audit Service annual report. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, members. And I don't recognise a couple of faces in here, so just a tiny little bit of background in that Leicestershire is a servicing authority for ESPO, and through the consortium treasurer, he arranges for an internal audit each year, an internal audit service for ESPO. So my team, including Matt here as a lead audit manager, provides that internal audit service. And this effectively, following on in the good governance theme, is the closure down of the 21-22 financial year. So whereas Dave was talking about 2021, this is 21-22, and it's a requirement that we follow public sector audit standards, internal audit standards, and it's a requirement that we have to provide an annual report to what is classed in those standards as the board. Now, in terms of ESPO, the board is actually the Finance and Audit Subcommittee. However, the subcommittee doesn't have any decision-making authority, and so there's a requirement for us to bring the annual report to management committee so that they can formally approve the annual report. There's specific requirements to include in the report, and the most important is basically an opinion on the overall adequacy and effectiveness of ESPO's control environment, and that is its frameworks of governance, risk management and internal control. So when we bring our plan to ESPO Management Committee, that gives an examples of all the categories of risk management, governance and internal control that we provide audits on. So in terms of how we reached the opinion this year, if I can ask you firstly to turn to Annex 1, which starts on page 129 of your pack. And that explains how I use a combination of evidence to reach the opinion, including the findings of audits, which Matt's team conducts, and they're summarised in another annex, Annex 2. I also then do a sort of macro evaluation of the control environment through observations, for instance, attending this committee, the Finance and Audit Subcommittee, and then reviews of policies and procedure. At the moment, heads of internal audit in local government are pretty free to choose how they form their opinion. I personally choose to comment on each of the three components of governance, risk management and internal control. So you'll find within that Annex 1, there are three sort of statements around the work we've done on governance. And the overall opinion is actually macro assurance over the defined period, which is the financial year. So I bring all of those threads together and use themes and trends and professional judgment to provide the opinion. And I remember 1 or 2 years back, we had some debate around this about how we reached that opinion. So I sought some advice from the Institute of Internal Auditors, and we went along with provision of a definition of substantial assurance, and that I'd still consider that fits ESPO's position. So that's basically explaining that there's a sound system of control, and that's effectively mitigating key risks, and it's contributing to the achievement of business objectives. So that's backed up this year by, there was only one individual audit engagement around cybersecurity, which was classed as partial assurance. If you need any more detail on that, I'm sure Matt will provide that. We came across occasional medium risk rated weaknesses, but they were identified in individual audit engagements. And then traditionally, we've retained confidence in management's attitude to resolving any issues that we bring to the table. So my opinion is at the bottom of page 131 in bold, and then it's also repeated in the annual report itself. I'll move on if members can ask questions at the end. So back into page 125, which is headed the appendix, and that's actually the actual annual report. So after a little bit of background, I'll repeat the opinion, and then starting through paragraphs 8 to 15, I start to provide summary context on the information that's taken from Annex 2. explaining for all the assurance audits that 1 audit returned partial rating and 7 returned substantial. At the time of writing the report, 3 audits were listed as work in progress. Matt's moved those forward now with ESPO, and 2 have since moved on to draft reports, so we're just concluding down on those. And we also provided some advisory work, around 12 pieces of work there. Paragraph 16-17, it outlines how the service performed, and then paragraph 18 explains that we've now been able to conduct a conformance against standards. I hadn't done that by the time we went to Finance and Audit subcommittee, but that's been conducted. It's come out positively, and that's in annexes 3 and 4 respectively. So finally, in that report, paragraph 19, a reminder that my opinion will go into the 21-22 annual governance statement. So that's the next year statement. So the headlines are positive overall opinion. The majority of planned work was achieved. Days provided were slightly under planned, and the service, our own service, generally conforms to standards. So that's my report. I'll gladly take any questions, or Matt will provide any clarifications.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for the report. I suppose the question that's burning is about cyber, but for me, the issue for me is about the council reports, the planned inquiries. If you could just give some detail about why that was the case, please. Yeah, so if you look at para 16, you've got overall performance against 21-22 internal audit plan, of which you've got the audits, those that were complete and those that were incomplete, and then 3 that were cancelled. I'm guessing that the cancelled is not the same as incomplete.
Yeah, thank you for the question. It was a mixture of replaced by other work and other work like cybersecurity taking longer than we expected in the first place. So something, you know, we've got a limited number of days. It was either buy more days or re-risk assess them into this financial year.
Thank you. So I was just wondering whether it was clearly a prioritisation issue, and you just got so many days. But that's clear. Thank you ever so much. If there's no one else, if I may, if no one else is going to ask about the cybersecurity, I suppose I really ought to ask that question about the partial assurance and how you think things can move forward from where you are currently.
Yeah, sure. I would prefer just to talk at overview on this, and if we need to do detail, do it in closed session for obvious reasons of security. But yeah, there was high importance recommendations coming out of the report. I don't think it was any surprise because ESPO had nearly fell foul to cybersecurity issues over recent years. And so we went in and did a deep dive, looked at it, went against cybersecurity essentials accreditation, sort of using those as the yardstick, and found issues that I think it's fair to say, and I don't know if anyone wants to come in on this from ESPO, but they were took very seriously, addressed starting to be addressed very quickly, and we've just finished some key ICT controls work that looks like it's going to come up with substantial assurance, and then we're going to follow up the cybersecurity work straight after in this next quarter to make sure all those recommendations have been implemented. I think, if I may, I think Dave Goodegg Christian wanted to say something.
Yeah, no, I think the only thing I'd add to that is, just to give a sense of reassurance, we had no cybersecurity attack. What we did have was, like everybody else, having to work in new ways, and I invite people to leave the building and work in remote ways, and inevitably that leads on to the massive uptake in cybersecurity over that period. So really welcome audit. I'd been astonished if you said, well, that's absolutely perfect. I don't think it ever will be. I don't think it'll ever be complete. So for me, this was about being risk aware and seeing anything that's good practice that we're not doing. As opposed to kind of we're on the edge of being absolutely destroyed by cybersecurity. So I want to give members that reassurance. And the most we kind of had is suppliers had their system hacked and we had a phony invoice. It was that sort of level of stuff, not people kind of hacking into our systems and causing major damage. But it's preventative. It's really important. So just to give it that context, but we're not taking it lightly. It's just a case of, thankfully, nothing major's happened.
Thank you both.
Any further questions from members of the committee? No, thank you all. So we have the recommendation that we approve the Internal Audit Services annual report. Propose a second of that, please. And all those in favour? Thank you. So,
Chair, I hope you don't mind. I'm going to leave the
No,
meeting
that's
now.
fine.
Matt's going to stay throughout that. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time. Okay. Thank you. So, members, if we can please move on to item 11, which is the Director's Progress Report. I'll turn to Christine again. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Good morning, everybody. It's really nice to see people in person, as well as obviously colleagues who have dialed in for Teams. But you know, you can do so much with Teams, but it really is good to see people. I'll start with purpose of the report. It's a regular report that I do that gives an update at ESPO. If I start with just the first section, what I'm tending to do today is not go through it line by line, because you've got a really heavy agenda, a lot of governance, other things to follow. So I'll just kind of take you through the salient bits and obviously take questions. At other times, we might go through it in more detail. So if we start with financial performance, I'm pleased to report we've had an absolutely stonking start to the year, which was kind of unexpected, but really welcome. And you can see these figures are 1 month to April, and there's a surplus of 0.7 million, which was 0.2 million better than budget. And what you can see is in store sales, 13.4% ahead, direct sales, 34.1% ahead, and freight code, 4.7%. And even when we adjust for inflation, that shows us real-time volume growth, which is really pleasing in terms of our bounce back years. Our costs continue to be tightly controlled, with expenditure at 2 million, which is in line with budget. And for the full year, just as a reminder, we set our goal of making £5.7 million surplus. That all said, we do remain a bit cautious. One, because it's very early on, and two, we do have, you know, a pay award which is very uncertain in terms of what's going to cost us. And obviously, inflation is creating a very dynamic trading environment for somebody like us. So if I just take you to the next level of detail for you, so you've got some information on sales and margin. Store sales was 2.3 million, 0.3 million ahead, which was 13% better than budget. Gross profit margin for stores was at 32.8, which is also ahead of budget. And direct sales were 1.4 million and 0.4 million ahead of budget. So gross profit margin percentage for direct was slightly behind, but we see this more as about the mix of the products we sold, and think this will normalise throughout the rest of the trading year. And you can see our rebate income at 1.1 million was in line in budget, as was our gas services. So overall gross margin at 2.7 million, 0.2 million better than budget. Secondly, in terms of our expenditure, which is obviously key to a trading organisation, you can see it was in line with budget at 2 million. And the key thing for me is expenditure as a percentage of sales, and the KPI we measure, and it was at 41.5, which is 7% better than budget, and just shows that our costs are being controlled in relation to sales activity. Finally, I'll just talk to you a little bit about the finances of our trading company, but the punchline is that it's in line with budget. There's quite a few details on page 161. But just kind of a high level summary would be that our international business has started the year really strongly and is ahead of budget, whereas our early years business is slightly behind budget, and this is due to a single customer who, for lots of different reasons, have been slow in terms of reloading our prices, making them available to their nurseries. In terms of our full year expectation, there are a few moving parts. So you can see product cost inflation is still something we're grappling with and has an unknown and potential impact on margin. Our framework income has in recent years tended to overachieve, so we're optimistic it will do the same this year. And the local government pay award is obviously not currently set, and that will have a cost pressure on us as well. Second section is always about operational progress, and for new members we lay out a sort of set of consistent measurements that you'll get really familiar with, I'm sure, and you'll be able to see a pattern. It makes it much easier to transparently report how we're doing. Today I think the thing I'll just point out to you is the idea of the scale of what we're doing. So you can see for April 81,654 order lines, and you can see in our customer services we've taken over 4,500 telephone calls. So it gives you a kind of sense of scale of what we're doing. Stock availability is obviously a key number for us, and at the point of authorship, our top 1,000 lines we had 98.1% available. We aren't in that position today. We've gone into our peak trading, and that availability number is under constant pressure for some of the kind of obvious things that we know about, which I'll cover later in today's meeting. Got facilities management information and the kind of scheduled repairs that we've done that we report. And there's one health and safety incident to do with a minor hand injury whilst moving a wooden pallet. Our electric vehicles are running well at ESPO. We've taken delivery and we've got charging points being installed, and that's something very much exciting for us as we kind of look at our fleet in the future. So the kind of first step on that road. Next section's really giving you a lot of insight into IT and cyber. The takeaway points for me would be that the IT team have had a really strong couple of years in terms of helping people work in all sorts of different ways, and the satisfaction rating reflects that. We're doing what we can to constantly improve our cyber security and some of our support arrangements, and they're listed on that report. And there's just a quick power on Grove Park, which we'll cover under separate report in this meeting, so I won't go into that at the moment. Final section really is to do with staffing, and the key takeaway points here is sickness absence continues to be really well managed, and COVID infection rates to the point of authorship were down to 0. Sadly, today we have got 3 or 4 people who are unfortunately positive with COVID, but the numbers are very slight compared to where they were at their peak. Staff numbers in the office continue to increase and are in line with national guidance on safe working arrangements remain in place. I'd also just like to tease out, we've already covered it a little bit, that the National Negotiated Body for Local Government Pay have received a submission for the trade unions, and it's probably worth noting for members that each percentage that's negotiated in that conversation with the employer is going to cost ESPO 140,000. So, you know, we look and see that's £140,000 pressure if it's beyond what we've budgeted. So we kind of have the sensitivity analysis for that. And Leicester Council are working with us to improve our recruitment practices. It really has been a tough time for recruitment and retention, which I'm sure you have at your authorities. And we're looking about how do we become more flexible, how do we become more dynamic in our recruitment processes in terms of things like CVs rather than taking long application forms. So that work's being undertaken. And then finally, what we do each quarter is have a quarterly review of health and safety, wellbeing and major risk records, and we report those major risks to the committee, and they're covered in Appendix 2. So finally, members are simply asked to note and support the contents of this report, and I'm obviously very happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Kristen. Any questions from members at this stage? Andy?
Thank you, Chair. Christian, thank you very much. A very comprehensive report. I think the issue for me is probably the same with all colleagues here, which is the recruitment problems and about how you're addressing that. I'm particularly interested in groups you're trying to approach. And one of the areas I know, certainly for our area, is the 55 plus group is so poorly represented in new employment. I wondered if that's where you were looking.
Yeah, thank you for the question. We haven't specifically got to that stage where we've split up the demographics. Our model, in all honesty, tends to be the opposite, where we've targeted at the local universities to see if graduates can come into our working environment. We tend to train them up. So it's almost mimicking a sort of KPMG model where the senior people tend to stay. We invite new graduates in, train them, and you know, we're happy if they stay a long time, but often they can command a higher salary once they've done some high profile stuff. So we're looking at that, but in practical terms, we're looking at things like having a recruitment coordinator entirely focused on going to recruitment fairs, recruitment processes, getting feedback. And one of the things the senior team have been discussing is traditionally you only get feedback for the people who've actually decided to join you and then subsequently decided to leave you. What I'm really interested in is the people who decided not to join us because they didn't apply. So we're now looking about how do you get a better suite of information about what people see us as employer.
Sorry, first of all, fairly basic question. How many employees does ESPO have? And then from that, how many vacancies does ESPO have? And are they in particular areas that we're struggling to recruit, or is it more general? And again, a quick follow-up question to that, if it is in particular areas, are we able to use market supplements or anything like that to try and increase our pool?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So I'll give you an indicative employee numbers. And the reason I do that is because we have a big peak in summer where our employment will swell, but we'll rely on different agency staff. ESPO can be anywhere from 300 to at a peak at 350. So it's that sort of order in terms of staff. We do have definite pockets of places that are hard to fill. Professional procurement is a major issue for us. Obviously, we're the largest local government procurement organisation. So outside central government, we spend the most amount of public money. If you look at the sort of £2 to £2.5 billion that we deal with at ESPO, it's probably the equivalent of about 4 or 5 large councils. So if you imagine we need a procurement department of 5 county councils and we're a little old ESPO, you know, that is a big challenge for us. So procurement staff definitely really, you know, commanding a higher salary elsewhere. So that's one area. Drivers recently, I'm sure you saw in the press in terms of heavy good vehicle drivers, and we did deploy a market supplement in that area to kind of bolster and maintain recruitment. So it tends to be the sort of procurement side of things, but equally in things like IT, we're now seeing challenges in recruitment. So probably if we were talking about this again another quarter, I'd probably say it's across the board. We're just about on the edge of talking about pockets, and then soon I think we'll just talk about it in general.
Thank you, Kristen. Any further questions at this stage? Obviously, we have the opportunities later on in the agenda. Thank you all. So I have your approval for the Director's Progress Report. So if we then can move on to item 12, with the exclusion of the press and public. And I would like to move that the public be excluded from the meeting for the remaining items on the agenda, as these contain exempt information. And do I have members' agreement? Thank you. Thank you. Just wait for a moment to make sure we're offline.